Ladies and gentlemen, please join us by giving a hand wave to welcome our guest of honor, Professor Bernard Tan. You can also click the clapping hand icon in Zoom reactions.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Chua Community Leadership Program, Hungry No More, Community Approaches and Food Insecurity in Singapore. I'm Kaur-Gill, Year 3 student and faculty of Social Arts and Social Sciences.
And I'm Ting, instructor at CTPCLC.
And your MCs for today. This November marks the 10th anniversary of the Chua Community Leadership Program. And today's roundtable discussion is one of the several activities we have planned to celebrate this occasion.
For today's session, we will be delving into the issue of food insecurity right here in Singapore. It is our privilege to have our moderator and panelists join us here and share their thoughts on how various community sectors can come together to tackle the challenge of food insecurity. Without further ado, let us welcome Professor Bernard Tan, Senior Vice Provost of Undergraduate Education, to give us his opening address. Prof. Tan, please.
Very good afternoon to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this event on Hungry No More, Community Approaches to Food Insecurity in Singapore. Even though we have to conduct this event online because of the pandemic, instead of doing this in person, I'm very pleased to see so many of you supporting this event. And I understand that in the audience today are NUS students, NUS alumni, NUS colleagues, as well as our friends from partner organizations. Thank you for being here with us. We have 5 interesting panelists today who will address the issue of food security, which is the theme of this event. And the panelists are Professor Albert Teo, Acting Dean, School of Management, Tung College. And in fact, Albert was the previous director of this program, of the Chua Community Leadership Center. Yeah. Mr. Bjorn Low, co-founder of Edible Garden City. Mr. Gerard E, Executive Director, Beyond Social Services. Mr. Yang, co-founder, the Maju Collective. Dr. Satveer Kaur-Gill, instructor at Chua Community Leadership Center, and Ms Sim Bee Hia, CEO, Food from the Heart. Thank you for contributing to this panel. Now, food security is an issue that threatens not only poorer countries. Increasingly, it has become a pressing issue even for more wealthy countries, such as Singapore, which we all know is a food paradise. Over the years, Singapore has been vigilant about diversifying our food sources because as a nation that does not have much land to grow enough food for our own population, we are reliant on many other countries for our food supply. The disruptions in supply chains caused by the pandemic recently have brought the issue of food security to the fore. Beyond food supply, effective food distribution is also very important. As a country, Singapore has produced, in fact, plenty of food waste. In 2020, the total amount of food waste generated in Singapore was worth more than $340 million, which is almost $1 million a day. The wasted food could have been distributed to people in need. There are still people in Singapore who have difficulty paying for their food daily, particularly food that does not impair their health in the long run. Now, the theme of today's event is therefore very timely and important. We look forward to hearing the perspectives of our panel members, and we hope to learn how different community groups can come together to address this very important issue of food insecurity. Today's event is one of several activities that the team of colleagues at Chua Community Leadership Center has planned to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Chua Tian Po program at NUS. For those in the audience who may not be familiar with the history of the Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center, let me provide the key highlights of this 10-year journey. Now, the center, generously funded by Dr. Chua Tian Po, was established in November 2011 as a leadership program that is open to all NUS students. When it first started, the program was housed within the University Scholars Program. Prof. Albert Teo, one of our panelists today, was the first director of the program. We started with only something like 40 students. Albert started many initiatives, including the Community Leadership Symposium and many other things. And on behalf of NUS, I want to thank Albert for his very able leadership of the program. From 2017, an additional gift pledged by Dr. Chua Tian Po created even more opportunities for Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center to grow and take on more students. And since 2017, the center has been operating independently from the University Scholars Program and has been given its own space at University Town. Under the directorship of Professor Chng Hoon, who succeeded Professor Albert Teo in 2019, the Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center continued to grow and recently launched a minor program. This is the only program in Singapore that offers students the opportunity to attain a minor in community development and leadership. And NUS students from any discipline who have interest in pursuing a community-centered career can enroll in this minor. Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center will further add value to the NUS curriculum when a number of its modules become a part of the expanded general education curriculum, particularly on the pillars about communities and engagement. Now, Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center has come a long way in the past decade. I want to acknowledge the generosity of Dr. Chua Tian Po, without which all these things would not have been possible. I want to acknowledge the commitment of the team of colleagues at the center, the passion and hard work of the many students who have been through the leadership program, as well as the support of our partner organizations for making the numerous successes at the center possible. And I wish Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center more good years to come, and hope to see many students of the program become community leaders of tomorrow. So happy 10th anniversary Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center, and thank you everybody for your presence and your kind support. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Tan, for the opening address. I'm sure everyone is very excited to hear from our panel. So let us now proceed directly to a roundtable discussion.
Please allow me to introduce our panel again to friends who have just joined us. This session will be moderated by Professor Albert Teo. Prof. Teo is the acting dean in the School of Management, Tung College, Hong Kong. He'll be joined by our panelists, Mr. Gerard from Beyond Social Services, Dr. Satveer Kaur-Gill from Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center, Mr. Bjorn from Edible Garden City, Mr. Yang from the Maju Collective, and Ms Sim Bee Hia from Food from the Heart. Prof. Teo and panelists, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Chloe and Ting. So a very warm welcome to our roundtable. I'm very excited to have been invited by Professor Chng Hoon to help moderate this session. So the Chua Tian Po Community Leadership Center has lined up 5 very wonderful speakers, 5 panelists for today's roundtable. So they will talk about the food insecurity situation in Singapore, and also how their respective organizations are creating impact by addressing this very serious issue. So maybe I would again get the panelists to do a quick round of introductions so that the participants can see who you are. Okay, so maybe to start off, let me hand you over to Satveer.
Hi, I'm Satveer, and I'm a critical health communications scholar, and I'm very interested in questions of health equity and social change.
Thank you very much, Satveer. And then over to Gerard. Gerard.
Hi, I'm Gerard, and I work at Beyond Social Services. We're a community development agency, and yeah, we organize people around what is important for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. And over to Bee Hia. Bee Hia.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the CEO of Food from the Heart, a food charity that has served beneficiaries in Singapore for the past 18 years.
Thank you very much, Bee Hia. Next, we have Bjorn.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Bjorn Law. I'm co-founder of Edible Garden City, a urban farming social enterprise. Been around for the last 9 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. And we have Yang. Yang, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Ek, Ek like body ache. I am an educator. I work in education for the last 8 to 9 years, and I'm seeing this issue from a kind of educator and youth perspective. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ek. So now let me invite Satveer to help us lay down the foundation. She will help us to situate today's roundtable based on her research on food insecurity in Singapore. So over to you, Satveer.
Thank you very much, Prof. Teo. All right, so I'll begin by sharing a bit more about my research on food insecurity and health disparities. As a health communication scholar, my research looks at how populations that are marginalized and disenfranchised in our society talk about their lived experiences with health disparities. So when my colleagues and I entered the field in 2014, we weren't specifically entering the field with any preconceived ideas around food insecurity, hunger, or food aid. We simply employed listening as a method that kept to the spirit of the dialogic commitments of community-based research to pay close attention to the voices of those experiencing poverty and health disparities, and to recover the erasures around the experiences of poverty and health disparities in Singapore. This process led us to hear and document stories of food insecurity experienced by low-income Singaporeans. So when talking about their health meanings, food insecurity surfaced again and again. Another group that is often missing when we talk about food insecurity, and I sort of want to point that out at this point, are low-wage migrant workers in disenfranchising employment contexts. They too face issues of food insecurity. I might not have time to talk about this in detail, but I just want us to expand the communities we acknowledge when it comes to food insecurity. I also want to suggest the value of looking at food insecurity through the lens of intersectionality. Doing that allows us to really locate the differences and variances in the experiences of different members in our society experiencing food insecurity, and also configure solutions that are culturally and structurally centric for these communities. So with that, the definition that kind of best sums up the experiences of food insecurity in Singapore is the one by Anderson. Food insecurity can be defined as the condition by which the availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or the ability to acquire foods in socially acceptable ways, is limited or uncertain. Other definitions could also include calorific intake or nutritional intake. Food insecurity, very importantly, is a form of health disparity. And as a critical health communication scholar, I'm very interested in how food insecurity plays out as a health disparity. There is a significant body of evidence documenting the adverse health outcomes experienced by vulnerable groups who are unable to secure sufficient and nutritious food. So food insecurity fundamentally is a bad thing because it results in poor nutritional health, poor mental well-being, depression, and higher levels of chronic diseases such as diabetes, high cholesterol, and heart disease. As participants shared stories about their meanings of health, a big part of their narratives around health centered around food deficits, nutrition, limited decision-making around food. In our paper on food insecurity among low-income groups in Singapore, health was about filling one's stomach on a day-to-day basis. Health was also about complex decision-making around food. So oftentimes, for example, a low-income individual might be tossing up between that $3 that he or she has for transport to go to the clinic for an appointment, or that $2 or $3 that he or she has to go to the market to buy single vegetables, or to give money to their children for food, right? So there are a lot of, what I'm getting at is that there are a lot of complex decision making around food and food aid. There's also an intermittentness to food. Now, coming back to domestic workers, the face of food insecurity or hunger in the case of some domestic workers in poor employment conditions or contexts often shares an intimate relationship with poor health and mental health for them. So a lot of them may talk about being given a piece of bread or a cup of coffee, given leftovers, or the restriction of meals. So to some, being food insecure and poor have debilitating violence on the bodies of the poor health-wise, with the unavailability of better options and with significant consequences for their health status. So for example, low-income households with poor health status and face food insecurity have limited options to govern their health in agentic ways. So if you have poor heart health and you need to prepare heart-healthy meals, but you're dependent on food aid that may not cater to your health needs, then this becomes a vicious cycle of ill health as well. For our participants, impoverishment means having to be on the losing end of various decisions you make about your health, or about having to make choices between very difficult decisions about the necessities of health. So the findings of our study demonstrate that health, food insecurity, and the lack of structural support are important dimensions that constrain the agency of individuals or their agentic capabilities to enact their best health for themselves, right? Because of the deprivation of resources. And finally, I really want to highlight this. A big part of food security is dignity, right? And this brings me to a very specific narrative that has resided with me for a long time while doing fieldwork. So while we were doing fieldwork on the ground, there was also food aid being distributed. And this lady had come about and she was rushing to get Maggi Mee packets. She had noticed that the Maggi Mee packets were religiously prohibitive, part of a religiously prohibitive diet, but she had to forgo that and said, never mind, just give it to me. I will prepare the Maggi Mee without the seasoning, because she had to feed her children. And her son sort of looked at her slightly confused about why was she taking something that was religiously prohibitive with regard to her food, to the food that she had available. So why I'm telling this story is because not being able to prepare and consume meals that are culturally and religiously oriented, again, is an issue of food and dignity. So with that, I sort of want to then pass it back to Prof. Teo to start the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Satveer. So maybe I would help Satveer to identify some of the key points that she highlighted in her sharing. So her research with her collaborators focus on collecting stories of different communities who face food insecurity. So one group will be the marginalized, the locals. The other group would be the low-wage migrant workers. And she shared that there's a strong linkage between food insecurity and physical and mental health. And so I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of access to food that is nutritious. And then also because of stress related to the individuals not having the luxury of making choices, many choices when they make decisions. So in terms of their daily expenses. And then Satveer reminded us that it is important to consider the dignity of the recipients of food aid. And the solutions in terms of the food that will be given to the food aid recipients, they need to be culturally and ethnically sensitive. Okay, so I really appreciate what Satveer has shared, because she would set the context for our discussion by the other four panelists. So thank you very much, Satveer. Now, let me invite Gerard from Beyond Social Services to share what Beyond Social Services are doing in terms of helping certain marginalized communities to overcome food insecurity. So over to you, Gerard.
Thanks, Prof. Theo. Well, I need to qualify. The first thing is that Beyond Social Services is not a food support agency. We are a community development agency. And what that means is that we try to rally people to self-organize around what is important to them. So over the last 10 years or so, one of the issues that people have said are very important to them has been food rations or food supplements in their daily routines. So every time we get people together to have a discussion, the topic of food does come up. Now, over the last 10 years, we found that as a, well, shall I say, a convenient way of engaging volunteers as well, because a lot of volunteers come by, they want to try to do something, and it always seemed very easy just to get volunteers to offer food and do things together with our members in the low-income neighborhood. But last year, because of the pandemic, we distributed over almost 100,000 meals, and that got us thinking as to what actually is going on, and actually motivated us to look at the issue a little bit more critically. And so we conducted a little study in one of the neighborhoods that we work in, and it showed us what food insecurity actually is through the narratives of those people who were telling us about their experiences with the whole issue of receiving food on welfare, so to speak. So there was a strong narrative of food for survival, but when we probe a little bit, we realized that there's not so much food for survival, because most people will say that they somehow can get by, but it is more about the anxiety of not having enough to eat. So food insecurity then dawned on us. It's not so much the absence of food, but but the constant living with anxiety that maybe one day the food won't be here, or maybe the next meal won't be here. I know we are a very rich country in that sense. There are abundant of resources, and somehow there is some food here and there. But as rightly pointed out, whether this is food that is detrimental to one's health or not, is another issue altogether. So basically, food insecurity is the anxiety of not knowing where the next meal will come from, or not having the assurance that the meals will be regular, or that the type of meals that I really want are available for me. So that's one definition that came forward. The other thing about the study that informed us is that food, people who are feeling food insecure, on one hand, it really affects the way they coexist among us. So for instance, even if they get very bad food, right, they feel that they are in no position to actually give feedback, because there's this fear again that if I give feedback, I'll be blacklisted, and maybe I won't be able to get, I will be taken off the list. So basically, sometimes it's almost like bad food is better than no food, right? Even if it's food they do not want to eat, at least the food is there. It gives them the kinds of, gives them a type of security. So that is the downside of it. The other thing is, well, it is not just also about feeding stomachs. It is also about the meaning that food represents in their life. And in that sense, I think many of them come across pretty deprived, because they often talk about experiences of having food with friends and how important that was, and how enjoyable those experiences actually were. And those were experiences that made life worth living. And there was one story I remember in particular, because today is Mid-Autumn Festival, isn't it? I was told, or at least I'm getting all these WhatsApp messages. That one family actually spoke about going out with their parents or their mother for a Mid-Autumn Festival meal, which was very, very important. For them, that was one of, it doesn't matter what they eat, that's what the person said, as long as I get to eat with my mother. So food has a very strong social and cultural meaning to it as well. It's not just about filling of stomachs, but it's about giving people a decent life, so to speak, and put plainly. So what is our work about, right, at Bjorn? So in this context, on one hand, while we organize people or we help people to organize themselves to receive the food that they want, there is another aspect of our work, which is about speaking to those who are giving the food. Because many of those who are giving the food do not look at a situation like that. They simply think that it is about feeding hunger or feeding hungry people. But very often, what these people do is they're feeding into the anxiety of people as well. Because this, you keep giving food that either people don't want, or you keep giving food that is inappropriate. We do actually contribute to the whole notion of creating anxiety. Like, I think the whole food giving system or food support system has to sit back and take a look and see how they may be inevitably contributing to the anxiety as well. All right, and I guess we have to speak to the donors and try and find a way where the donors can take the perspective of the people who are receiving, and to create some dialogue between the givers and the receivers in a manner that leads to better outcomes. So that, in a nutshell, is what we do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gerard. So for the benefit of our participants, let me help to summarize the key takeaways from your sharing. So as you mentioned at the beginning, Beyond Social Services is not a food charity. Rather, it provides a range of community development programs to help lower income, marginalized communities and families. And then you talked about food insecurity, not really a case of people facing hunger and therefore not able to survive, but it's more a case of anxiety, not really knowing when the next meal will come, and also making like sometimes very tough decisions in whether you should spend money on food for the family or you have other pressing daily expenses which you also need to address. And then you talked about the power distance between the donors or givers and the recipients of food aid. And this power distance somehow encourages the recipients to not provide feedback even when they are given food that is not very palatable. So you suggested that there should be a greater dialogue to help donors understand and to develop empathy, to look from the perspective of the recipient of food aid. So these are some of the takeaways from your sharing. And another important point, you mentioned that food also has social and cultural significance. And very often, food is also an opportunity for the family to come together to develop positive family experiences. So I hope I've done justice to your sharing earlier on. So thank you, Gerard. Now, let me invite Bee Hia to share with us the programs that Food from the Heart actually curates to help the food insecure. So over to you, Bee Hia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Food from the Heart started as a food charity with IPC status in 2003. So it's been 18 years. It was started by an Austrian couple, and because they read a news article about surplus bread, unsold bread at the end of a business day being thrown away by a bakery, they got people together and they collected this unsold bread and distributed it to welfare homes and partners who could use them to feed other people. So over the years, Food from the Heart has actually evolved into one of the biggest dry ration food support in Singapore. And before COVID, we were packing about 5,000 to 6,000 food packs a month. And today, we are packing more than 10,150 food packs a month, giving away about 150,000 food items a month. And this includes staples like rice, vermicelli, instant noodles, canned protein and veg like sardines, curry chicken, mushrooms, peas, and corn, beverages like oats, coffee, tea, and Milo, fresh produce like eggs, root vegetables, and fruits. So what we give is a very holistic way of giving food support. So as a food charity, when we have partners coming to us, companies doing CSR, schools, potential partners running programs for us, we were actually asked whether Singapore actually has poor people. So we were also asked whether do we really have people going hungry in Food Paradise Singapore, where we go downstairs in a HDB estate, you can see a hawker center, you can see a coffee shop. So during circuit, so that's something that I hope the participants will also think about. How do you define poor? How do you define people who go hungry in Singapore? It's quite different from the definition, say in other countries. During COVID circuit breaker last year, we saw an increase in the actual number of application of food packs, direct applications to us and applications through our partners. A father asked for food support, but declined our offer to deliver to his doorstep, as he did not want his children to know that he was receiving food support. School leaders whom we partner with worry students receiving food support may get ridiculed by classmates. So they requested that we not put the food in a Food from the Heart plastic bag. So the stigma of getting food support is more apparent than many of us think. Many also tend to think that the food insecure is the solution to minimizing food waste. But is it really that? So that's something that I hope the participants will also ponder. For Food from the Heart, we raise funds and we raise food donations. We work from two fronts. One is about donating right, so that we can give better. Well-intended public tend to think, I just give, right? I just buy food, I just go to a rental block, I just distribute. So you see a lot of ad hoc food support being given out. But what Food from the Heart stands for is about sustained giving. That when a beneficiary comes on board our programs, the only time that we stop giving them is when our partners take them out of the list, or when they passed on for the seniors, or when the younger students, the second generation, break the poverty cycle. So we are there for them every month, and the food goes to them every month. So, it's not about giving more or bigger that may be better. For example, if donors give us a big jumbo bottle of oil, it is just too heavy for a senior to use it for cooking. It is actually detrimental for them. It's actually quite dangerous as well. Rice. If you were to give us a 5 kg pack of rice and we give it to a family, that's sufficient for them for a month. But a 5 kg pack of rice for a senior citizen staying alone, they are not going to get fresh rice for another 2-3 months because of the rate that they consume the rice. And 3-in-1 coffee, 3-in-1 Milo is very convenient for people like you and me, right? But it is actually very detrimental to beneficiaries who has some illness, for example, diabetic. So for us, what do we do to impact the landscape of giving is to share wish lists of food donations and so that our food support can be more targeted. So we actually work through a template with corporate schools who wants to do food donation drives on the type of food and the size of the packaging that can be donated to us. We also curate food packs suitable for elderlies, food packs suitable for young families, food packs suitable for dialysis patients. It is really not about the donor, it is and always must be about the beneficiaries. So in Chinese, we call it's not 一厢情愿. You don't do it one-sided affair. As what Gerard was saying, there must be conversation about what you give and what do the beneficiaries really need. 2, food from the heart is moving towards, we have moved towards and we will continue to move towards dignity of choice. So we advocate very strongly the dignity of choice, that every individual must be empowered with that dignity of choice. So those who has food insecurity has a right to decline what they do not want. So if I don't like a can of baked beans, I can decline a can of baked beans, right? The right to say no is not something we should expect beneficiaries to give up. So for example, what we have done at Food from the Heart is we have started 2 community shops, one in Boon Lay, one in Mountbatten. It is a shop next in the HDB estate with all the other shops. The beneficiary just need to use the Food from the Heart's beneficiary card. They can go in, they can browse, they can choose, and they take what they need when they need it. So every month they are able to take 12 items. There are chillers inside the shop. So we have things like milk, things like butter, things like fruit juice, things that we cannot pack in a food pack. And they can choose. So for a senior citizen, they can choose, for example, I want a bigger tin of biscuits, and next month I don't take biscuits. So there is a choice. It also cuts down food wastage. And what the examples have shown is that a lot of them, some of them do not use up the 12 credits a month when they don't need to collect anything from the shop, right? Second project that we did is Project Belanja. Belanja in Malay is I treat you a meal. And that's exactly what it is, Project Belanja. It is a digital warm meal redemption that will work with hawkers within the community. Currently, we have 4 points island-wide, and we have distributed about 50,000 meals. Beneficiaries just need to use the Food from the Heart card. The participating hawker store just need to scan the card, and then they get their meal. And hawkers are paid every 2 weeks, internet banking, and it's a contactless way of giving food help. Then our local partners who identify beneficiaries are able to concentrate on a more holistic support scheme for each beneficiary. So we're looking at non-disruptive, seamless way of giving food help that goes in with their daily habits of benefiting families and seniors. So it caters to those who cook, those who don't cook, or those who can't cook. And to give a voice to our beneficiaries, as what Gerard has mentioned, it's important to communicate and hear from our beneficiaries. But unfortunately, some beneficiaries are not able to articulate what they want, what they don't want, their thoughts, or they're shy to say it. So we are now using digital tools and conducting data analytics to help us to gain insights into consumption habits. So, for example, a beneficiary in Mountbatten who is under the community shop and under Project Belanja, we will know exactly when they go to the shop, what brand of food they have taken, what size they have taken. We know when exactly which food store they go to. Today, they can take Western food. Tomorrow, they can actually go and take char kway teow, or they can choose chicken rice. So with all the data that we collect, we have better insights into consumption habits, into the diet concerns. So those are the new initiatives, and we strongly believe that this will actually chart the future foodscape in Singapore and will form an integral part of the new ecosystem of food support. So food actually opens many doors, and it opens up many partnerships as well. People with good intentions who want to donate, want to do well in food support, wants to give your help in a targeted manner and not waste it. Work with food charities, work within that the partners, and then we are able to achieve more synergy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bee Hia. So allow me to summarize some of the key points that you shared with us. So you mentioned that Food from the Heart emphasizes that donors must donate right and must give better. So as I remembered what you mentioned earlier, bigger is not better. So you gave us some examples. So the focus should be on sustained giving rather than ad hoc giving. And then you emphasize the importance of empowering the recipients of food aid with the dignity of choice. So the recipients must have that right to say no if something is inappropriate, something is not suitable for them. And then you talk about community shops. So providing the recipients of food aid with choices in the community shops. And then you mentioned the curation of food packs for people with specific special needs, like maybe the older adults, or maybe people who are dialysis patients. So you curate the right type of food pack for these individuals. And then you shared with us a very exciting project, Blanja, which is basically you work with a network of hawkers in food courts, in hawker centers, so that the members of Food from the Heart can actually partake of meals from various hawkers. And you mentioned the importance of collecting data and analyzing data on the recipients of food aid under your programs. So data analytics would help you to better understand the consumption patterns of the members of Food from the Heart. So and then you mentioned another important point, the services that you provide to the recipients must not be disruptive of their daily life cycles. Rather, you should be providing seamless support to the recipients of food aid. So I hope I have done justice to your sharing. Thank you very much, Bee Hia. Now, I would like to invite Bjorn to talk to us about the programs that Edible Garden City organizes and implements. So over to Bjorn.
Thank you, Prof. Alvin, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess today's topic is about food. I hope everyone had lunch already before this. So, we have been in the urban agriculture space for the last 9 years, and a lot of the work that we did in the early years were about activating unutilized space for the purpose of food production. And this brought about discussion around access to land and of the commons, the green commons, and do we have the rights to actually farm these spaces for food production? Over the last 9 years, we have put in buildings, rooftop car parks, under the viaducts, 260 of these edible gardens and urban farms, whether it's working with property developers, hotels, restaurants, schools, into people's homes, and also with community groups as well. However, there is always a challenge within the urban agriculture space globally on the potential of it to exclude marginalized communities and access to food. Why do I say that? We grow a lot of high value produce, and as an enterprise, we are, whilst a social enterprise, we are still working largely within the capitalist food system. If you look at the challenges that is faced globally, social ecology, which was coined by Marie Bookchin, is a relationship between ecological and social issues. In the context of neoliberal Singapore, the capitalist food system is something that has actually caused this inequitable food. And we have seen supply chain disruptions over the years, more pronounced during the COVID period. Of course, food had a hard time getting to the shelves. But in the agriculture sector, we saw also our access to seeds and fertilizers were also curtailed during this period. So there's a bit of scrambling to do. But of course, the larger narrative around climate change, the farmlands being dilapidated, over-farmed, a lot of these are in developing nations to then distribute and supply food to the wealthier nations. The food system has also been very excluding when capital starts to move away from a city. This has been seen in cities like Detroit in the past, when the automobile industry moved out. It created food deserts because markets and supermarkets moved out as well as capital moved. So these are mainly marginalized communities, African-American communities within those precincts, do not have access to fresh food. All they have is the corner liquor store where they can then get access to junk food. So it's an ongoing discourse between, are we food insecure or is it more a topic around food sovereignty? Food sovereignty is the rights of people to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecological, sound, and sustainable methods. And this is really back to the inequitable food system and unequal distribution of food. It's not that we don't have enough food, right? Singapore have the ability to throw away 700,000 tons per annum. And so it's really now that we need to rethink the food system, not just from Singapore, but globally. How we shift from a centralized production system to a decentralized one, located closer to the communities and managed by the communities. Think about, the kampong backyard, very romantic, with vegetables growing everywhere and access is there for everyone in some ways or another. We need to shift the mindsets and taste buds from one that is of a global palate. We tend to demand strawberries 365 days a year, right? Wild strawberries do not grow really in our tropical humid environment. Shift that to more a local palate, that is of native fruits and vegetables that's more accommodating to our tropical climate. And we really need to think on how do we provide access to culturally appropriate, nutrient-dense food to the most marginalized of our community. Rethinking this approach and building a sovereign food system really through a whole society approach to growing of food, while straddling within the capitalist system, while driving a social food movement. This is a mammoth task, and we really require changes in policies and land use, retraining of citizens for agriculture participation, and food education in our schools. And we are really just at the beginning of this journey to build a food collective actualization. Thank you. Back to you, Albert.
Okay, thank you very much, Bjorn. Let me try to summarize. It's a bit challenging for me because I am seeing that your perspectives are at a very macro level. So you mentioned that there are deficiencies in the capitalist system today because it poses a lot of challenges to the overall food system. And then you mentioned, like from the start, Edible Garden City had been looking for unused spaces, green commons, even the rooftops of buildings as potential sites for urban gardens. And you mentioned that urban gardens in Singapore, they tend to exclude the marginalized and the vulnerable. And then you mentioned the concept of food sovereignty, which is basically the right of every individual to have access to safe, nutritious food. And so towards the end, you suggested that all of us should have a rethink on the food system. Perhaps we should decentralize the food system and then devolve it to the community level. So you mentioned the kampong spirit, revitalizing the kampong spirit, different communities helping one another. So I hope I have done the summary right. So thank you very much, Bjorn. And last but not least, let me now invite Ek who would share with us the work that the Maju collective does in the area of food insecurity. So over to Aik, please.
All right, thank you, Albert, and thank you everyone for that awesome sharing. As I was listening just now, I was like, okay, let me tear apart everything I was going to share, and I think just focus on one or two things that I found very inspiring. I think just now, Gerard, you mentioned that we contribute to this system of anxiety. And I think as an educator, it's always thinking about how do we change that system of anxiety into, I think what Bee Hia used was a system of support, right? And when we think about that system, my first question is, who's going to be part of that system? And how do we kind of inspire people to be part of that system of support while recognizing that they contribute to that system of anxiety? And I think that intersection is where education lies, right? So I think I just want to talk about two main things that I think are very important to education. I think when we think about education, the first thing that I think is very important for educators to recognize is that education at its root is to build a sense of identity in our youth, right? So when we say, okay, all these kind of topics that we have to cover and the injustices that we face, we also have to help young people realize that they are part of that system. They're not just seeing that system from a distance, right? And it's the day-to-day interactions and feelings that they feel that are extremely valid in that as well. The second is a sense of ownership, right? So identity is who am I, where am I placed, who's around me. And the second, ownership, is that sense of responsibility that you feel. And I think in Singapore, we have a very strange relationship with responsibility. I think in schools, it tends to be, do you submit your homework, right? But responsibility in this sense is, how do you make something that you care about so important to you that you make it your own, right? And I think when we think about education as a cross of identity and ownership, then it becomes very easy to see how these topics intersect with our education system or outside of our education system in a young person's life. And I think, through the Maju Collective in the last 2 years, there are a lot of things that we did. I think maybe some of you are interested in the methods that we kind of went across stuff. So I'll just quickly kind of share a little bit. So the first, I think, is framing, right? I like Gerard sharing just now about narratives and how it's really how we paint the narratives of people. And framing is exactly that, right? Showing young people that, okay, you might agree with people like Bjorn, Gerard, Bee Hia, Satveer, but at the same time, when you go out and then you go and look for a professional job, let's say with a fast-moving consumer good FMCG, right? And then you realize that you agree with them as well, right? So how do you feel that tension in yourself and kind of navigate that tension? I think is really important to bring to young people. The second, I think, is distance, right? So the thing that we like to do, what I like to do as an educator, is to help people realize that these issues aren't very far away. So when we think of it as a topical approach, right? You go like, okay, I'm going to analyze this. I'm going to maybe write an essay about it someday. But actually, if you kind of just flip it and you say, can I maybe go and ask my grandfather about his food experience last time, right? I go down to the neighborhood, I take a walk, right? I visit Edible Garden City. I think these are things that help you realize that the distance isn't that far away, and all that tensions that you feel in that narrative building just now suddenly makes a lot of sense, and you start to find that values and ethical ground that young people really need to take action. And that's the last thing, right? Action. And a friend that I spoke to used a really nice word called the arena. So the arena is a place that you put things out, a place that you let young people start projects, do things, contribute to society. And I think it's not, I think a lot of people like to say, oh, you shouldn't be starting your own things, you should just contribute to existing organizations. I think these are really, really good, well-intentioned things. But when we talk about identity, I think it's also not many people are going to go out and do things right the first time, right? They're going to be quite naive when they first start out, and then they start to hit different bumpers along the way. And the idea that you have to get things right from the start, I think, can be quite immobilizing, right? So when we think about mobilizing, can we say, okay, let's let people explore, if you want to start their projects, we start our own projects as well. But have the right guides, the right mentors, the right ecosystem around them to say, I can help you figure things out and watch you make your mistakes and to see that you end up in a good place. Yeah, so I just wanted to wrap up that I think my sharing was more a reflection of what people have mentioned. I was really inspired by many of what people have said. So that's me. And let's move on to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Abe. Allow me to do a quick summary. So you felt that the point raised by Gerard about anxiety faced by the food insecure resonates with you. So the issue is then how do you provide that support system, and who should be involved? How do you get people on board to provide that support? And you mentioned the importance of what the Maju Collective does, which is focus on education of younger people, as I understand. Okay, and then you mentioned three aspects of the educational process. First, you encourage the youth to develop narratives of the food ecosystem, of food insecurity. And so the emphasis is on first helping people to do that framing. And then after that, once they have done that framing, come up with their stories and narratives, you encourage the young people to go out to seize opportunities to reduce that distance between themselves and the food insecurity issue. So that would actually help to raise the motivation level of the people that you are reaching out to. And then finally, ownership. So it's important that the young people should be challenged to develop a sense of responsibility. And then they will start to think about how in their own ways they can tackle food insecurity. You mentioned being in the arena and also getting mentors on board so that they can provide guidance to the youth as they curate their respective programs and projects. Okay, so I hope I have done justice to your sharing. Okay, now I see a lot of questions coming in. I hope I can read them well because I have Lao Hua Yan and the font is a bit small. I try my best. Okay, there's a very long question which is directed at Satveer. Let me see whether I can get the gist of the question. Okay. So this question is coming from a group called RTE, Ready to Eat, and the Yishun Community Fridge. And so the question is, it would have been good if these organizations could also have been invited to be part of the study. I hope I've interpreted the question correctly. And the person who raised the question also mentioned that the volunteer network is very strong, that too. And so whether Satveer has reached out to Free Food for All. So that is the question for Satveer, but I think Satveer has in the meantime answered that she doesn't have an answer to the question. So
Albert, I think I'm just going to sort of come in here.
Okay, very good.
It's not best suited for me to answer is because I look at health disparities from the lens of community members experiencing this, right? So for me, a big part of understanding the experiences is giving, or sort of not giving, but enabling space for communities experiencing food insecurity to talk about their lived experiences with food insecurity. So of course, it'd be great to expand and understand a whole variety of different perspectives and the various food networks, but I'm really interested in the participants' agency. And this is where I sort of want to come back to Bee Hia's point, which is so lovely. And I think, it's such a great takeaway message, is because what she's doing is she is fundamentally saying to us that we need to recognize the agency of those that are food insecure, the agentic capabilities to say no when they don't want food, right? Because this disrupts this idea of personal generosity in the food aid to recognizing that this individual has choice. This individual is in this context because of structural disruptions in the economic environment that has led them to become resource deprived, right? And also still make or organize around their own food choices. So that's where I sort of want to really come back to about how food aid organizations like Biha's, where she talked about constantly also being reflexive of the process, going back to community members, interviewing with them, speaking with them, understanding their needs, iterative process, so that you create the most sustainable system that works for community members and that gives them agency and decision-making processes. Yeah, so I hope that sort of captures the essence of what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Satveer, for helping me out. Okay, now let me come to a question from our CTPCLC alumna, Adriana. So Adriana, I saw your question earlier in the chat box. You talked about cooking and having home-based businesses. So is it possible for the low-income families to be mobilized to cook nutritious meals for the community, also as a source of income generation? And that brought back memories of the work that we used to do in the CTPCLP, focusing on asset-based community development. And basically, it's about agency, empowerment, so that the recipients not only receive, they have opportunities to also give and contribute to the community. So I'm wondering whether Gerard or Bee Hia, you could comment on this particular perspective about involving the recipients of food aid in some of the community programs so that they feel that they also can give to the community.
I'll take that first.
Okay.
Okay, just to, it is not that impossible, but it's also not that easy. We did have a case of a mother, a single mother. She was receiving the school goodie pack from us, which is actually 15 items, bigger pack items as suitable for young family. She actually used the items inside to actually bake, and then she sold it during Hari Raya. She also made, she used the sardine to make curry puff, and she sold it as well. Okay, so it has been done before. It is not impossible, but there are very, it's a high bar to cross. Firstly, the beneficiary must themselves must be a little bit entrepreneur, certain level of skills. And I think when you're talking about cooking for big numbers, and especially for the vulnerable group, food safety comes in.
Okay.
So for example, I have expired instant noodles at home. You know, if I smell it, I look at it and it's okay, I will still eat it because I'm responsible for my own stomach, right? But for a food charity, we can't. We are really the goalkeeper, and we must ensure that the food goes down, you know, the entire system of distribution, that it remains safe, it remains fit for consumption.
Okay.
So there are high bars to cross, not that impossible, but even for a community kitchen, there are out there in different parts of Singapore. I think what needs to be managed is also people management skills, because some seniors may not get along with another senior, and then they end up quarreling with each other. So there's a whole lot more complexities than just getting them to cook and generating income. So it's not impossible, but it's something that we probably would need time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bee Hia. What about Gerard? Do you have any perspectives on how the recipients of food aid can also give back to the community?
Yeah, actually, we've been doing it for a while now. I think more than a year. We call it Project Matsala, where we collect money from the donors, and we have an understanding with the donors that the funds they give go back to a group of mothers or cooks in the community who actually prepare meals for their neighbors on an ongoing basis. So in this way, while we attend to food needs, we also attend to building work capabilities of a selected group of mothers as well. Yeah, so it's been going on, and it's something we will probably keep doing.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Gerard. Then now I'm going to pose a question to Bjorn. I'm curious to know whether or how Edible Garden City helps to decentralize the food system and enable a more community-centric sort of food production system.
Thank you for that question. I mean, our efforts over the last 4 to 5 years has been quite focused on activating state land or transitionary state land into community farms. So the first one was located in Queenstown on Jalan Penjara. And this is in many ways right in the middle of the heartlands, providing access to the community to participate and also be involved in the agriculture process. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, as we straddle within the capitalist food system, sometimes the products that we do produce is for the niche market. But the social employment model that we put in place ensure that we are addressing some of the social impact challenges within the estate. I think broadly, the opportunity is ripe at this point of time. We have 1,000 community gardens in Singapore. This is through the MParks Community in Bloom project program. And with this 1,000 community gardens, they are within all major residential estates. The opportunity for these to then become a subset of food production zones is something that can be explored, should be explored in running moving it from a hobby-based kind of gardening and vegetable growing process into a social enterprise initiative, whether then it can provide jobs to the residents around. Many times, retired residents who have a couple of hours to spend in the gardens, and there is a therapeutic benefits from gardening and planting food as well. That works on the whole sort of holistic mental wellness. Again, studies done by NUS and MParks has been very positive in this area. And these nodes, once activated, could form, a decentralized food production framework for Singapore. The challenge, though, is that when you allow small farms to sell food or sell produce, the governance structure is something that needs to be considered. And one is of food safety as well, right? So how do we address this? Whether the food needs to go through somewhat of a testing and to look for pathogens and things like that as a process within these estates has to be thought out. There are similar models in places like Seoul and Korea where community farms would be centralized. So decentralized farms with a hub with these kind of lab services to ensure that produce are safe before they are then distributed to the community through a community shop. So maybe in future, Bee Hia's shop can be a community vegetable shop, all the community farms, supply to. So these models are there, and we can achieve that, I believe, in the near future.
Yes. Okay. I took a look at the Edible Garden City website last night, and I was really heartened to find that there's this comment that the community farms provide employment as well as therapeutic benefits to older adults, i.e. retirees, to people who are differently able, and also the marginalized and the vulnerable. So that's very commendable. Okay. Then maybe I have a question for Ek. I have a question for Ek. You mentioned earlier that you would like to encourage young people to come up with solutions to maybe food insecurity problems and other problems. And then they could pilot test these ideas. So currently, does the Maju Collective work with existing like maybe food charities or other NGOs or social enterprises to allow the youth to at least have a bigger platform to pilot test the ideas so that you do not have duplication of efforts. Maybe someone else is already doing something at a larger scale. So maybe you could comment on this.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I'll start by saying I think one of the ways to best understand what we were working on, I know I mentioned like work on projects and start solutions just
yes.
now, but I think it's really a process of framing problems. And why do I say framing problems? I think it's important for people to, before they even start anything, start to understand what frustrates them, what excites them, and what kind of things do they actually want to solve. And that's a very delicate process of understanding the system. So sometime last year, actually, a lot of the work that we were actually working on was, okay, can we, come out with broad themes? We actually had food narratives as one of them, then community building as another one of them. And we just kind of compile what people have said about it before, right? And we let young people, again, just look at them, talk to people, go and reach out to other organizations to understand what's one problem maybe you are facing today and maybe how can I help you? Right. And again, it's not, okay, I jump in and help right now. It's that lateral interdisciplinary kind of like understanding, again, from many parts of the food system. So I think it was really important for us to let people just have that space to consider different perspectives. I think that's really important. So apart from like the social enterprises or food charities, we also kind of let people speak with like agri-tech companies, the agri-tech investors, and again feel that tension, right? And feel how that's very different. So yeah, I hope that's not like a cop-out answer. I hope I answered that question in a certain way. I think the most important thing I wanted to bring across is that for young people wanting to hop into the food system,
yes,
it's not an easy process. There are so many things. I see a lot of questions like, oh, it's a deep systemic issue and stuff like that. It is, right? But it's also about empathy, anxiety, and all these things that are very human. And I think once you start to jump into that emotions, then you start to figure out what other things you want to do. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for this very lively Q&A session. So we now have time for our panelists to share their concluding thoughts.
Okay. So maybe Satveer, you could give us some sound bites.
All right, sure. I'll keep this as short as possible. But I think the two things that I sort of took away from today's panel, especially from other speakers, is one is not to create sort of a hunger industrial complex, right, around by creating anxieties around when my next meal is going to be because of the way food aid programs are structured. And the other being recognizing that food is a fundamental right, and therefore we all should be able to exercise our agency in choosing the food that we want to eat, the food that we want to prepare, the food that is healthful for us, right? And I think Bee Hia sort of explained that so beautifully, and being very reflexive about this process, that we must constantly look at whether we are meeting needs, whether the community can center a lot of the decision making, whether they can come on board with the decision making processes, whether they can be part of the community development process, right? Or they should be part of the community development process when it comes to recognizing their food needs, acting for their food needs, and organizing around food. Yeah.
Thank you, Satveer. What about Gerard? Any advice or any words of wisdom to share?
No, I don't know whether they are wise or not, but I think it is really not about us. I know a lot of us want to try and help and do something. Whatever we want to do, I think it has to be filtered through an observation or constant questioning of how is what I am doing actually experienced by the people that I'm supposed to help or journey along with. So it's a lot about agency, right? I've seen some big questions in the chat. How do we solve this? How do we solve that? I don't think we can. You know, I really don't think we can. But what we can do though is we can create agency so that people can address the challenges in their lives in a manner that makes them feel empowered, makes them feel purposeful, makes them feel strong. I mean, in one word, not in a way where they have to feel like they're begging for the next meal.
Yes.
Right. So we can do that. And what we are doing actually with the study, the main reason for producing the study that we did is actually to take the findings back to the people, to ask them, hey guys, what do you think about this? This may not be in your neighborhood, but it happened in the next neighborhood. And this is what people are saying about food insecurity. Do you resonate or not? Or does it make sense? No, those are the conversations that we are having with the people. And we are beginning in this few days as we speak. My colleagues are busy preparing the structure of the conversation. And this is the work, right? It's giving the problems back to the people. I know it's very, how they put it, it's very discouraging and sometimes even unpleasant to think that we have such problems. Such problems are systemic and structural, and I'm not sure if we talk about identity, I'm not sure if it's the identity of an NGO like us to be able to address that. I really don't think so. I think the most we can do, or the best that we can do, is to help people gain a sense of agency in addressing their challenges. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Gerard. Over to Bee Hia. Bee Hia, please.
Okay, I think food support is never a simple one-dimensional problem that we can just have a one-size-fits-all solutions. Even beneficiaries, some cook, some don't cook, some can't cook. And then you have different race, different age, and all that makes a difference to how we actually give food and the type of food that we give. So even like today is Lantern Festival, you know, happy Lantern Festival to everyone in the audience. But, you know, to the beneficiaries, their Lantern Festival starts after the actual Lantern Festival. They all seem to have a different calendar. Chinese New Year is celebrated after Chinese New Year because that's when people have excess food and they start giving out, right? We're trying to change that landscape to ask donors to be more mindful about the timeline, that you celebrate Lantern Festival today, the beneficiaries also celebrate Lantern Festival today. So mooncake should be given before Lantern Festival and not post Lantern Festival. So timing, the type of food, the size of food, how we give, when we give, I think that's the technical part that we can resolve. I think what is very important is the public education of how we treat beneficiaries with respect and give them back that dignity, because it is not that they cannot choose, right? So I think that is really, you must see everything together. It's not just a food issue, it is a bigger than food issue. Food only opens the door to more issues, and hopefully it opens the door to more solutions as well. So, and really we must take into consideration, COVID has really changed the landscape. It is not normal anymore. It is very different from pre-COVID times, and we must move with the times, and we must be forward thinking and plan, how do we give food aid 5 years down the road? We should not be solving yesterday's problem. We should be solving tomorrow's problem, and we must start today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bee Hia. And Bjorn.
Thank you. I think a lot of wise words and summary has been shared. So I guess from my perspective, we started in the agri production space, but then evolved our thoughts and our work into the social and community space as well, and that's where we see the real value being created. Whether it's providing livelihoods, accessibility to food, but also working on deeper systemic challenges within the healthcare industry, to really use urban farms as a place for care for society, by providing food and also activities for mental wellness as well. As it's been mentioned a few times already, it is a systemic problem. The food system is very systemic and is huge, right? There's so many inroads into it, from production all the way to distribution to consumption, and to change it all at once is a mean, tall feat. So if there's a word of encouragement, advice, I do feel everyone should partake a little bit into trying to grow your own food, because from that process you will see how hard it is. Appreciate the farmers, not us, but farmers in the developing nations who are struggling to produce this food for us. Treasure it a little bit more, and waste food a lot less, because you understand how hard it is. And for that, perhaps we'll come to a next level of consciousness, to consume more ethically, and to have a little bit more of the social responsibility and environmental responsibility, to consume to our means, so that we have we have enough for everyone, and I hope for that to happen.
Thank you, Bjorn. And Ek?
Yeah, I think a lot has been said. I think the only thing I wanted to say, beyond under his note on responsibility, and I mentioned just now that responsibility and ownership is a way to make something mean so much that you cannot do something about it, right? So I think at the end of the day, we can slice the cake in many ways. We can draw the system, we can analyze the system. But a lot of these things are actually just relationships and friends that we will make along the way. I'm sure as people like Gerard and Bee Hia and everyone here who works with the communities, these are not just communities, but also friends and relationships. And I think it's as simple as that, right? So I think after this, I'll ask some of the panelists for coffee or something. And that's maybe the most important thing for this panel. Not my coffee, but people to have coffee and tea and make friends. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ek. So I guess I will now do a wrap up, right? I believe I have about 5 minutes to do the closing. So before that, I would like to thank the panelists once again, Satveer, Gerard, Bee Hia, Bjorn, and Ek. And also thank you very much to the participants. I feel so bad because you have posed so many interesting questions, but we just do not have time to go through each question. So my apologies to our very enthusiastic participants. Okay, so let me do a quick summary of the things that I learned today. So I learned like from Satveer, from Gerard, from Ek, the importance of narratives, of stories. Not only the stories of people who are facing food insecurity, also the stories of young people in Singapore. Then I heard about structural systemic barriers, institutional barriers from Satveer, from Gerard, from Bjorn, and perhaps the solution is the community needs to step up to take charge. So devolution of the food system to the community level, which is what Bjorn's social enterprise is doing. And then I also heard about anxiety. So about anxiety of people who face food insecurity issues. So as what Gerard mentioned, it's not so much about survival, it's not so much about hunger, it's anxiety, which is you do not know when is your next meal. And I think that is important to address because it also means that given the financial constraints faced by the food insecure, it also affects their ability to make decisions. So the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable, they face a lot of challenges in making good choices when it comes to decision making, because very often it's a matter of, do I use the money to feed my family, or do I need to channel that limited sum of money for other important daily expenses? So that anxiety. And then what I heard from the various panelists is about agency, it's about dignity of choice, it's about empowerment. So that goes back to the ethos of the CTPCLC, which is really about community development. So different people can play a role to help one another, and hopefully to tackle food insecurity at different levels in our own respective ways. So thank you very much once again to our panelists. I will now hand you back to Chloe and Ting. So thank you, MCs.
Thank you, Prof. Teo, Ek Yang, Bjorn, Bee Hia, Gerard, and Satveer for the insightful discussion. Let's give our panel a round of applause. You can do that by clicking the clapping hands or thumbs up icon in reactions in the chat. I'll now hand the time over to Associate Professor Chng Hoon, Director of the Chua Thian Poh Community Leadership Center, to share her closing remarks. Prof. Chng, please.
Thank you, Ting. And thank you, panelists. What a wonderful session. Just give me 3 minutes. I should be able to close this very quickly. Those of us who arrived early would have heard our opening address by our Senior Vice Provost, Professor Bernard Tan, who announced the fact that this year is the 10th anniversary of the Chua Thian Poh program. So indeed, yes, this November marks the 10th year of existence of the Chua Thian Poh Community Leadership Program, a program which came about because of the generosity of Dr. Chua Thian Poh. Dr. Chua envisioned and enabled a meaningful pathway for us in NUS to develop community leaders who actively advocate for those in need, and for all of us to collectively engender a stronger and better society. I am very privileged to find myself traveling on this path, helping to facilitate the work at the Chua Thian Poh Community Leadership Center in NUS, and to build on the good foundation that our former director, Professor Albert Teo, has put in place. Our work at the center can only happen because there are visionary and empathetic leaders like Dr. Chua. And we have also had passionate community partners like Beyond Social Services and Food from the Heart, to name just two. Most importantly, we also have NUS undergraduates who are choosing to put community welfare before self. To all of you, my team and I wish to express our immense gratitude for enabling our work with students and with community partners. I received a newsletter that our panelists Beyond Social Services put out on a regular basis, and have learned a tremendous lot from the narratives posted in this particular newsletter. The latest issue carries a story about food insecurity, which triggered a memory for me. The story told to us by Beyond Social Services of one person's sheer delight over just being able to eat a piece of much-loved kueh kueh was heartwarming and yet very difficult to read. I recall an older brother recounting to me and my siblings that he was once rewarded with a piece of cake by his teacher for having achieved good work. And young as he was back then in the 70s, he understood enough to save it for our mother. But our mother only smiled warmly, as we are used to see her do, and pushed the piece of cake gently back to him, signaling to him that he deserved this well-earned prize and should enjoy it himself. This story of how our mother made this and other sacrifices will remain etched in my memory. I was too young back then, too ignorant to understand what food insecurity meant, but now I do appreciate what one piece of cake can mean for a family struggling to meet basic needs. It means consideration for others. It means love. Today's roundtable, having to focus on food insecurity, is therefore troubling. I say troubling because stories like mine are common in the 60s and 70s in less developed Singapore. And yet now, in the 21st century, in a highly developed world, we are still discussing this issue when there seems to be plenty to go round for the most parts. In fact, there are places close to home where food wastage has become a problem to solve. A 2021 Credit Suisse Research Institute Global Wealth Report said that there has been continued wealth growth globally, even amidst COVID-19. And in fact, the growth was 7.4%, with wealth per adult reaching a record high of almost US $80,000. Even countries said to be worst affected by the pandemic have not fared worse in terms of wealth creation. Then why are there people in our midst still experiencing these anxieties and fears over where their next proper meal will come from? Clearly, much more work awaits us, and I am heartened by the fact that we have organizations like the Chua Foundation and the ones that our panelists are leading in their own ways, who are working to empower and equip those in need. We must consolidate our strengths and our resources and continue to plug the inequalities in our society. Food insecurity being just one symptom of unequal distribution of wealth and access. On this note, I wish to thank all of you in the audience for taking time out to join us today. Thank you to the organizing team led by Ms. Kwa Ting Ting, who conceptualized this event. And a very special thanks to all panelists and our moderator for educating us on this pressing issue of food insecurity. I hope that we have each taken something concrete away with us, and we will leave this event inspired to act and mobilize our peers in the interest of community welfare. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Prof. Chng. We've now come to the end of today's roundtable session. Thank you for your participation on our panel, for your insights. May I invite everyone to remain on Zoom to take a group photo. So we'll now proceed with the group photo taking session. And when I say 1, 2, 3, you look at your webcams and smile.
Elsie and Vic, could you cue us when you are done with the photo taking, or Hazel? Thanks. All right, 1, 2, 3, smile. Hazel, is the photo taken?
Yeah, good.
Okay,
I'm good.
thanks, Hazel. All right, so we have come to the end of the event. A big thank you to everyone for spending your time with us here at Chua Community Leadership Center. We hope you have found this event to be an informative and fruitful experience. Once again, thank you, and we hope to see you again someday. Bye.